I never thought my husband's business trip to a remote Scottish island would unravel a secret so dark that it would make me question every moment of our seemingly perfect 5-year marriage. My name is Sarah. I'm 32, and until 3 months ago I believed I was married to Jake, a 34-year-old investment banker whose love was as solid as the ground beneath my feet. We had the life people dream of: a beautiful home in a quiet tree-lined suburb, 2 successful careers, mine as a lead software engineer, his in high-stakes finance, and a deep, trusting bond forged from years of friendship before it ever blossomed into love. Or so I thought. The first crack appeared not with a bang but with a whisper of change. Jake returned from a week-long trip to the Isle of Skye, supposedly finalizing a complex, confidential deal for a reclusive client who valued absolute discretion. He brought back the scent of peat smoke and sea salt, and a tweed cap he'd bought from a village market. He was different. Not cold or distant exactly, but preoccupied, his mind 1,000 miles away. His phone, which had always lain casually on the coffee table, was now perpetually face down or clutched in his palm. He'd developed a new habit of taking long, solitary walks after dinner, something he'd never done before, returning with his jacket smelling of the night air and a quiet, unreadable expression in his eyes. When I'd ask about his trip, his descriptions of the misty glens and towering sea cliffs were vivid, even poetic, but they felt rehearsed, like a tourist reciting facts from a brochure rather than a man sharing a genuine lived experience. My intuition, that quiet, persistent voice I'd always prided myself on listening to, began to whisper that something was fundamentally wrong. My younger sister, Kelly, 29, was my usual confidant. Despite our complicated history, her being the charismatic, socially brilliant, but often volatile one who craved the spotlight, while I was the steady, analytical problem solver, we had forged a fragile peace in adulthood. I confided in her about my unease over a bottle of Pinot Noir at her impeccably decorated apartment. "Don't be silly, Sarah," she'd said, swirling the wine in her glass. "Jake adores you. He's probably just stressed from work. You know how those finance wolves are. They eat, sleep, and breathe their deals. Men are just weird like that." Her dismissal should have reassured me, but it only made me feel more alone, as if my concerns were trivial female nonsense. Kelly had always been a bit enviously dismissive of my stable life with Jake, especially when contrasted with her own tumultuous relationship with her wealthy but emotionally detached husband, Tom. Her marriage was one of comfortable convenience, meticulously maintained by a generous monthly allowance from Tom's old money parents, and she often complained about the lack of passion and Tom's obsession with his family's dull history. The mystery deepened a week later. I was working from home, debugging a stubborn line of code when a package arrived for Jake. It was a large, flat, carefully wrapped box from a boutique art gallery in Edinburgh. Jake had no particular interest in art. Our walls were adorned with tasteful generic prints, not original works. My heart hammering against my ribs, a sense of dread coiling in my stomach, I carefully opened it, telling myself I was just being protective, ensuring it wasn't a fragile item that needed special handling. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, was a stunning framed watercolor painting. It depicted a specific dramatic coastline I recognized instantly from Jake's photos. The jagged pinnacle of the Old Man of Store on Skye, silhouetted against a sky ablaze with the soft hues of dawn. It was beautiful, achingly so, but it was the small handwritten note tucked into the corner of the frame that turned my blood to ice. It wasn't signed, but the elegant looping script sent a jolt of recognition through me. It was vaguely familiar, yet I couldn't place it. "For the memory of our sunrise. A piece of the sky to keep with you always. Our sunrise. Not the sunrise. Our sunrise." This wasn't a souvenir. This was a love letter rendered in paint and paper. The careful anonymity of the note felt like a calculated move, suggesting the sender knew it would likely be seen by me. It was a deliberate yet deniable provocation. I hid the package in my home office closet, a secret burning a hole in my house. I didn't confront Jake. Instead, the software engineer in me took over. I became a detective in my own life, methodically gathering data. I checked our detailed phone bills. There was a new, frequently called number with a Scottish prefix, calls that sometimes lasted over an hour. Using a pretext about a potential phishing scam, I called it. A woman's voice, melodic and cultured with a soft Scottish lilt, answered with a simple, hello. I panicked, muttered wrong number, and hung up, my hand trembling so violently I nearly dropped the phone. The digital trail was there, but it was circumstantial. I needed proof. Swallowing my pride and my fear, I hired a discreet, highly recommended private investigator based in Edinburgh. My instructions, sent via an encrypted email, were simple. Find out who owned that number and document any and all interactions between that person and my husband during his recent trip to the Isle of Skye. The wait was agony, each day a slow burn of suspicion and heartbreak. The investigator's report arrived a week later as a password-protected PDF, and it was more devastating than I could have ever imagined. The woman was Dr. Alara MacLeod, a historian and archivist specializing in Scottish clan histories, who lived in a small inherited croft on the outskirts of Portree. Jake hadn't been staying in the modern hotel in Portree as he'd claimed. He had rented a secluded, stone-built cottage a mere half-mile from Alara's property. The PI included time-stamped photos that told a silent, damning story. Jake and Alara walking along windswept cliffs, deep in conversation, sharing a quiet coffee in a village cafe, their heads close together, and one taken from a great distance with a powerful lens, of them embracing at sunrise near the very rock formation depicted in the painting. The evidence felt irrefutable. My husband, the man I had trusted implicitly, was living a double life. He was having an affair. Blinded by tears of betrayal and a fury so pure it felt like a physical force, I drove straight to Kelly's apartment. I needed my sister. I needed to scream and cry and have someone confirm that I wasn't going crazy. I burst in without knocking, the printed report clutched in my white-knuckled hand, and poured out the whole sordid story in a ragged, incoherent flood. Kelly listened, her face a perfectly crafted mask of shock and sympathetic outrage. She held me as I sobbed, muttering venomous curses against Jake. He's a monster, Sarah. A complete and utter bastard. How could he do this to you? After everything you've built. Her outrage was a balm to my shattered ego, her shared anger a lifeline in my sea of despair. We spent the evening devising a plan, fueled by wine and a shared sense of righteous vengeance. I would confront Jake, but not immediately. We would gather more evidence, ensure I was legally protected financially, and then I would expose him for the liar he was. Kelly was my rock, my fierce ally. She even suggested a radical idea, that we take a trip together to Skye, a sister's healing retreat, where I could perhaps confront this Alara woman on her own turf, look her in the eye and gain a sense of powerful closure. It felt dramatic, dangerous even, but in my raw pain, it felt empowering and right. The following day, however, a cold, analytical clarity settled over me, cutting through the emotional hangover. Grief was replaced by a methodical, almost clinical need to understand the why. I looked at the PI's photos again, zooming in on the details, studying them like a crime scene. Something about Dr. Alara MacLeod nagged at me. She wasn't the glamorous, predatory femme fatale I had imagined. She looked intelligent, serene, with a quiet strength. And in several photos, even the one of the embrace, there was a profound, unmistakable sadness in her eyes. It didn't look like the face of a woman gleefully stealing another woman's husband. It looked like the face of someone carrying a heavy burden. Driven by this new, unsettling doubt, I did what I do best. I researched. I fell down a digital rabbit hole, delving into Dr. Alara MacLeod's professional background. She was a respected academic, published in reputable journals, an expert in the histories of the specific clans native to Skye. Her work was meticulous, thoughtful. And then I found it. A digitized archive of a local Sky newspaper from 25 years ago. A small, heartbreaking article about a tragic accident. A hiking mishap during a sudden storm that claimed the lives of a young couple, Alastair and Moira MacLeod. The sole survivors were their infant daughter, Ilara, and her maternal grandfather, who subsequently took her to live with relatives on the mainland. The pieces, impossibly, began to shift and form a different, even more terrifying picture. Why would a woman with such a deep, tragic and personal connection to her family history and her home engage in a sordid, whirlwind affair with a married American tourist? It made no psychological sense. The timeline was also off. The PI's report indicated their first meeting was prearranged, not a chance encounter. My suspicion, reluctantly and horrifyingly, turned away from Jake and toward the only other person who had been actively feeding the narrative of his infidelity with such fervent certainty, Kelly. I thought back to her reaction. It had been perfectly supportive, almost too perfectly scripted. Her immediate suggestion of a confrontational trip to Skye now seemed less like supportive solidarity and more like a way to cement the narrative, to ensure I saw only what she wanted me to see, to make the affair feel undeniably real. I remembered a throwaway comment Jake had made months before his trip, about Tom's family having fascinating historical roots in Scotland, and how Kelly had scoffed, saying it was a pretentious fiction his family used to seem more noble and less new money. A wild, terrifying theory began to form in my mind, a conspiracy of epic proportions. What if there was no affair? What if Jake's trip was exactly what he said it was? Business. But of a deeply personal and confidential nature connected to Tom's family history. And what if Kelly, chronically insecure and terrified of anything that might threaten the fragile financial ecosystem of her marriage, had discovered the true nature of Jake's mission and had orchestrated this entire elaborate illusion of an affair? Her goal? To make me turn against Jake, to create such a catastrophic marital rift that I would demand he abandon his work for Tom, thus discrediting him and halting any investigation into something she desperately wanted to remain buried. It was an insane theory. But the alternative, that my kind, honest Jake was a masterful liar capable of such a profound betrayal, felt equally fantastical. I was trapped between two unbelievable truths. I had to know. I couldn't ask Jake. If my theory was wrong, I'd be accusing him of a betrayal he didn't commit, potentially destroying our marriage with my own paranoia. If it was right, I might alert him to a danger he wasn't yet aware of, jeopardizing whatever delicate operation was underway. I had to go to the source. I had to meet Ilara MacLeod. I booked a flight to Scotland under the pretext of a last-minute mandatory software conference in London, a lie that tasted bitter on my tongue. I didn't tell a soul, not Jake and certainly not Kelly. I landed in a drizzly Edinburgh, rented a small, unassuming car, and drove the stunning, nerve-wracking road through the Highlands, across the bridge to the Isle of Skye. The dramatic beauty of the place was a stark contrast to the turmoil in my heart. Finding Ilara MacLeod wasn't difficult. She was listed as the primary archivist for a small historical society in Portree. I found her in a quiet, book-lined archive room, surrounded by faded maps and leather-bound ledgers. She was even more striking in person, with kind, intelligent eyes that regarded me not with guilt or defiance, but with open curiosity. My cover story felt flimsy, but I pushed forward, introducing myself simply as Sarah, a researcher from the U.S. interested in clan histories, specifically any connections to families with Tom's surname who had emigrated to America generations ago. Her reaction was subtle but immediate. A flicker of sharp recognition, then a veil of professional caution. "That is a particular name to be interested in," she said carefully, her accent soft. "Their story is quite complex. May I ask what sparked your interest?" My heart was a frantic drum in my throat. The pretense was unbearable. "I think you may have recently met my husband," I said, abandoning the charade, my voice barely a whisper. "Jake." The change in her was instantaneous and profound. The professional mask fell away, replaced by a look of profound relief mixed with acute anxiety. She quickly guided me out of the public archive and into a small private office. "You're Sarah," she whispered, closing the door. "He said you were smart. He said you'd figure it out if anything went wrong. He was so worried about the secrecy." Over the next 2 hours, seated in a quiet corner of a cafe overlooking the harbor, the real story unfolded, and it was more incredible, more layered than any simple affair. Tom's family, Alara explained, had not just vague roots in Skye. They were the direct descendants of a chieftain of a minor but historically significant clan. Decades ago, during a bitter and violent family dispute, a branch of the family, including Tom's grandfather, had been forced to emigrate to America, severing all ties under a cloud of shame and acrimony. Before he died, consumed by regret, the grandfather had confessed the true story to his son, Tom's father. He revealed a deep family secret. A parcel of land considered sacred to the clan, containing ancient burial grounds and the ruins of their original stronghold, had been unjustly stolen from them through forged documents and legal chicanery by a rival branch of the family. The foundation of the family's considerable wealth, it turned out, was partially built on this original illegitimate act. Tom's father, a proud and stubborn man, had buried the secret, too ashamed and too pragmatic to reopen old wounds. But Tom, a quieter, more principled man than his father, had grown up with the ghost of this story. He felt a deep moral obligation to clear the family's name and right the historical wrong. He couldn't use his family's own lawyers, who were bound to his father's wishes. So he had turned to his most trusted friend, Jake. He hadn't hired Jake for his banking skills, but for his discretion, his analytical mind, and his integrity. Jake's mission was to work clandestinely with Alara, the leading expert on the region's history, to piece together the historical, genealogical, and legal evidence needed to quietly and legally reclaim the land. Jake's business trips were secret missions to uncover the truth for his best friend's family. He couldn't tell me because Tom had sworn him to absolute secrecy, fearing that if Kelly, with her mercurial nature and focus on financial stability, found out, she would use the information, or the potential scandal of a contested inheritance, as leverage or even sabotage the entire effort to protect her allowance. Kelly, in her paranoia about her financial security, had grown deeply suspicious of Jake's mysterious, unexplained trips. Using money from her allowance, she had hired her own PI to follow Jake in Skye. Seeing him meet repeatedly with an attractive local woman, she saw not a historical inquiry but a golden opportunity. She had received the same set of photos I had, but she had interpreted them through her own cynical lens. The painting and the note were her masterstroke. She had commissioned it from a local artist based on the sunrise photo, carefully mimicking a romantic script. It was designed to weaponize my heartbreak against Jake, to destroy his credibility in my eyes, and by extension halt his investigation before it could potentially disrupt the status quo of her life. I returned home, the truth a heavy, empowering, and terrifying weight in my chest. The flight back was a blur of emotions. Relief so profound it made me weak, rage at my sister's calculated betrayal, and a deep aching sorrow for the pain my husband had been carrying alone. I waited until we were in the safety of our home, then I told Jake everything. I showed him the hidden painting. I confessed about the PI. I recounted my trip to Skye and my conversation with Alara. The relief on his face was overwhelming. He held me for a long time, his body shaking with a mixture of laughter and tears. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry I lied to you. Tom made me swear. I hated every second of keeping this from you." He explained the immense pressure Tom was under, the delicate nature of the legal battle that was now, thanks to their work, almost certainly won. We were closer than ever, a united front against a common enemy, my sister's breathtaking manipulation. We decided to expose her, not with a dramatic public scene that would feed her thirst for drama, but with a quiet, undeniable and private confrontation that would strip her of all her weapons. We invited Kelly and Tom over for a civil dinner, under the guise of wanting to smooth things over after a rough patch. Tom, who was still largely in the dark about the true extent of the situation, looked tense and uncomfortable. Kelly wore a mask of smug sympathy, clearly believing her plan was reaching its successful conclusion. As we finished dessert, a tense silence hanging over the table, Jake looked directly at Kelly, his voice calm and steady. "Kelly, we know you hired a private investigator to follow me in Scotland." Kelly's face went pale, but she tried to bluster, her eyes darting towards Tom. "What? That's ridiculous. I was worried about Sarah. I was protecting my sister from your lies." "It's over, Kelly," I said, my voice steady, though my hands were clenched under the table. "We know about the painting you commissioned. We know about the note you forged. We know you tried to make me believe Jake was having an affair to stop him from helping Tom's family reclaim what was stolen from them generations ago." Tom stared, utterly confused and now alarmed. "What are you talking about? Jake, what is this? Reclaim what?" Jake then laid it all out for Tom, his best friend. The true purpose of the trips, the years of historical research with Alara, the overwhelming evidence they had gathered that would restore the sacred land to his family's name, clearing their ancestors' shame. He explained how Kelly's interference, her deliberate campaign to create marital discord, had nearly derailed everything out of a selfish desire to maintain her comfortable, funded existence. The look on Tom's face was one of dawning horror, disbelief, and finally a cold, quiet fury. He turned to Kelly, who was now visibly shaking. "You knew?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "You knew about my family's history, about what this meant to me, to my father's memory, and you tried to sabotage it? For what? To protect your monthly allowance? That land is my family's legacy. It's about honor, not money." Kelly unraveled completely. The mask shattered. She screamed, she denied, she called us liars and conspirators. She accused me of always being jealous of her, of inventing the story to steal Tom's sympathy. But the truth was a solid wall against her hysteria. It was all there in the evidence Jake and I presented. The PI reports, the artist's receipt Kelly had carelessly left on her own credit card statement, the timeline of her actions. Her lies collapsed under their own weight. Tom stood up, his decision made, his face a stone mask of resolve. "We're done, Kelly. This is beyond forgiveness. This is a betrayal I cannot even comprehend." He walked out of our house without a backward glance, leaving her sobbing and raging at our dining room table. We eventually had to ask her to leave, her screams echoing in the quiet street. The fallout was swift and merciless. Tom filed for divorce the next morning. With Jake's and Alara's meticulously gathered evidence, he successfully reclaimed the family land, a victory that solidified his family's fortune and their honor. He immediately cut Kelly off financially, completely and permanently. My relationship with my sister was irrevocably shattered. She moved to another city shortly after, leaving behind a trail of bitter, blaming messages for myself and our parents, who were horrified when we explained the full story to them. Jake and I, however, found a new, unshakable depth in our marriage. The trust we had, tested to its absolute limit by secrets and manipulation, had not only held firm but had been reforged in fire, stronger than ever before. We had faced a shadow together, a threat born from within my own family, and we had emerged into a brighter, stronger light. We learned that sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't affairs of the heart, but cold, calculated crimes of greed and fear. And we learned that the truth, no matter how painful the path to uncover it, is the only foundation upon which a true and lasting love can be built upon.